a video played in a glass-walled boardroom, and Sarah's own voice, confessing to the theft, made the senior partners push back from the table. By the time Liam walked out of that office, his sister had nothing left. No job, no reputation, no way to explain away the words she'd spoken in the ICU while her brothers' lives unraveled. But that was the end. The beginning had been quieter and far more brutal. 13 hours earlier, the rain was drumming against the kitchen window of a studio apartment that didn't belong to him anymore. Liam's hand, nails bitten short, skin cracked from the cold, slid across the linoleum counter, searching for the coffee mug he'd left there that morning. Instead, his fingers touched something damp. An envelope? Yellow. Official looking. The paper was soaked with yesterday's spilled coffee, but the letters were still visible, printed in bold red. Possession proceedings commenced. He picked it up carefully, as if it might detonate. The text swam in front of his eyes. Friday. That was 4 days away. His last day in the studio apartment on Mercy Street, the place he'd rented for 18 months, the only address he'd had since the hospital stay that had swallowed the year before. The apartment was silent, except for the refrigerator's struggling hum. He'd been awake for 3 hours already, sitting on the edge of the bed in the dark, watching the rain. He knew what the envelope contained before opening it. He'd been waiting for it the same way a man waits for a diagnosis he already knows is coming. Liam set the envelope down and picked up his phone. An iPhone 8 with a spider web crack across the screen and a screen protector that had started peeling at the corners. He scrolled to the contact labeled Sarah, Big Sis, and stared at the name for a long moment. Then he tapped the call button. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, it went to voicemail. Her voicemail greeting was professional. "Hi, you've reached Sarah Vance. I'm unavailable right now, but your call is important to me. Please leave a message." He waited for the beep. His breath came shaky. "Hey, Sarah, I'm in real trouble this time. They're changing the locks on Friday. I just need a place for a week. Please call me." He hung up before his voice could crack further. The apartment was exactly as it had been before the call. Nothing had changed. The rain continued. The refrigerator continued humming. Across the city, in a corner office on the 43rd floor of a glass building that caught the morning light like a prismed diamond, Sarah Vance looked at her iPhone 15 Pro and saw the notification, 1 missed call. Liam. She didn't need to listen to the message. She already knew what it would contain: a plea, a crisis, another emergency in a long line of emergencies that stretched back 15 years. She slid the phone face down on her mahogany desk, next to a designer handbag and an empty Starbucks cup from breakfast, and returned to the spreadsheet on her computer screen. The office was pristine. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city, the morning light catching the metal frames of her minimalist furniture. Everything in the room was positioned exactly where it should be. Everything was under control. Back in the studio apartment, Liam was still standing in the kitchen. He looked at the yellow envelope again, then at his phone. No response. He dropped the phone onto the envelope and covered his face with both hands, his elbows resting on the cold linoleum counter. Outside, the rain drummed on. The refrigerator hummed its struggling song. Friday came with the sound of heavy boots in the hallway. Liam heard them first, the methodical thud of work boots on carpet, and moved to the doorway, gripping the wooden frame with both hands, his body a barrier. There were 2 of them, big men in tactical vests, and between them, the weight of official authority. The first one was older, his face carved from stone. He looked at Liam with the mild expression of someone who had done this 100 times before. "Step aside, son. We have the order," the bailiff said. His voice was flat, robotic, drained of any human feeling. Liam didn't move. His fingers dug into the wood of the doorframe, and for a moment, just for a moment, he seemed to believe that the frame could hold, that his body could hold, that something could stop what was coming. It couldn't. He lunged at the first bailiff, reaching for the clipboard the man was holding. It was a desperate move, the kind that only ever happened in the instant before everything got worse. The second bailiff moved faster. He grabbed Liam's right arm and twisted it behind his back, the joint screaming in protest. Liam's face twisted in pain, and he could hear his own grunt of agony, high and ugly. The floor came up fast. Liam's body hit it hard, his shoulder absorbing the impact. His head snapped sideways, and for a moment he saw stars, actual stars, scattered across his vision like someone had shattered glass inside his skull. The bailiff on top of him was heavy. Liam couldn't breathe. He kicked out, wild and desperate, and felt his sneaker connect with something. The first bailiff's shin, maybe. The man cursed, and suddenly Liam was airborne again, pushed hard against the hallway wall. His head hit a framed picture, a landscape print he'd never really looked at, just something that was already there. And the glass shattered. Pieces of frame and glass rained down, sharp and bright, hitting the carpet around his head like tiny daggers. He was pinned. He could feel one of the bailiff's knees pressing into his back, pinning him to the rough hallway carpet, the texture of it scraped against his cheek. The second bailiff had moved past him now, toward the apartment. Liam could hear boxes being dragged, the sound of cardboard scraping across the floor, and then the soft thump of boxes hitting the hallway. His entire life, reduced to cheap cardboard containers, being discarded like garbage. A photograph fell out of one of the boxes. Liam could see it from his position on the floor, a picture of him and his sister as children. He was maybe 7, she was 10. They were both laughing, caught mid-moment in some forgotten instant of summer. His eyes stayed fixed on that photograph, even as he felt the weight lift off his back and heard the metallic sound of a new lock being fitted to his door. The bailiffs were done in 15 minutes. They didn't say anything to him as they left. Liam sat on the floor, leaning against one of his own boxes, and pulled his phone out of his pocket. The screen was cracked further now. The battery was at 3%, and there were no calls from Sarah. He looked at the lock on the door. Brass, new, impersonal. He'd never enter that apartment again. The storage locker facility was a maze of metal corridors lit by flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed like dying insects. Liam walked through them with the key in his hand, a key to a unit he'd paid for 3 years ago with money he'd borrowed from someone he'd never paid back. The unit was in the back, past dozens of others, each one a small grave of forgotten things. Unit 247. He unlocked it and stepped inside. The space was cramped, 5 by 5 feet, the walls corrugated metal that reflected the weak light from the hallway. It was cold. It smelled like dust and old plastic. In the corner was a bin he recognized. Blue plastic, the kind you could buy at any hardware store. He'd stored his mother's things here after the funeral, items too painful to keep but too precious to throw away. Documents, letters, a wedding album, things that belonged to dead people and living people who didn't want them. He opened the bin. He opened the wire. Inside, protected by Ziploc bags and plastic wrapping, was a bundle of envelopes tied with a blue ribbon. Old ribbon, the kind from 20 years ago. The letters were yellowed at the edges. The handwriting on the front was elegant, shaky with age. To my children. Liam pulled out the first envelope, dated 10 years ago. His fingers trembled as he opened it. The paper inside was cream-colored, thick. His mother's handwriting again, the same shaky elegance. He read, "Sarah, I am leaving the house proceeds to you on the condition you divide them with Liam when he turns 25. He is not stable enough now, but he will need it." The words seemed to move on the page. Liam read them again and again. His mother had left him money. His mother had left him a trust, and Sarah was supposed to give it to him when he turned 25. He was 28 now. He had lived on ramen noodles and rice for the last 3 years, his apartment subsidized by a combination of disability checks and whatever gig work he could manage. And his sister had been sitting in a glass office, drinking green juice, and his mother had left him money. There was another envelope inside. A bank statement, the paper thin and formal. He pulled it out with shaking hands. The date was 3 years old. There was a withdrawal marked in red. $200,000. Withdrawn by Sarah Vance. Signed by Sarah Vance. And above it, a note in his mother's handwriting. The condition of this trust is that Sarah acts as temporary custodian. Full transfer should occur on Liam's 25th birthday. If he is still unwell at that time, the money reverts to Sarah. His mother had left him $200,000. His sister had taken it, and then she had told him that there was no money left from the estate when he'd called her, desperate 3 years ago while he was in the hospital. Liam stood up quickly, and his head hit a low shelf. He didn't feel it. The pain existed somewhere far away, disconnected from his body. He looked at the phone on the floor of the storage unit, and then he looked at the bank statement in his hands. The red circle around the withdrawal date seemed to grow larger, seemed to pulse, seemed to consume everything. He stuffed the letter into his jacket pocket, kicked the plastic bin over, and walked out of the storage locker. The bundle of envelopes scattered across the floor. He didn't look back. His boots made a heavy, deliberate sound on the metal walkway. The sound of someone who knew exactly what he had to do, and exactly how little time he had to do it. The ballroom was all crystal chandeliers and soft music, a space designed to make people feel like they were floating in wealth. Sarah stood in the center of it, a black silk gown draped across her frame, looking like she'd been carved from marble. Her champagne flute caught the light as she laughed with the donors around her, a group of men and women who wore their money like armor. She was saying something about the foundation's work, something about children in crisis situations, and the irony of the words seemed to exist in a different dimension from the truth. The men were nodding, opening their checkbooks, and Sarah was smiling the kind of smile that made you believe in her complete sincerity. The doors at the far end of the ballroom exploded inward. Liam was drenched in sweat, his denim jacket stained and torn, his face still bruised from the hallway wall. His eyes were wild, scanning the room like he was hunting something. The music died. The crowd went silent. All of them felt it in that instant. The arrival of chaos, the intrusion of real suffering into a space designed to deny its existence. "Where is it, Sarah? Where's the money Mom left me?" His voice was raw, scraped with desperation and rage. A security guard moved immediately, a man built like a refrigerator, and he grabbed Liam by the neck. Liam swung a wild punch, connecting with the guard's radio, and the security guard reacted by tackling him into a table laden with hors d'oeuvres. The impact was violent and absolute. Platters of shrimp scattered like confetti. Caviar exploded into the air. Liam felt his ribs compress as he hit the table and then the floor. A second guard arrived, and together they pinned him down, forcing him face first onto the remains of the buffet. Liam could taste salmon and salt and his own blood. The second guard twisted his arms behind his back, and he felt metal closing around his wrists. handcuffs. He was being restrained like an animal. Through it all, he could see Sarah. She was standing completely still, her champagne glass raised to her lips, watching him with an expression of mild disgust. She didn't move toward him. She didn't cry out. She simply turned to the string quartet and made a small gesture with her head. The music resumed, upbeat and elegant, as if nothing had happened. Liam was dragged out of the ballroom, his feet scraping across the marble floor. The last thing he saw was Sarah turning her back on him, her shoulders straight, her gown falling in perfect folds as she walked back to her donors. The doors closed. The music played on. The interrogation room was small, windowless, a space designed to compress time and guilt into its walls. Liam sat at a metal table, his wrists still raw from the cuffs, and watched as Detective Miller tossed a document in front of him. The paper landed with a soft slap. "Your sister filed a restraining order," Miller said. He was a tired man, maybe 50, with the kind of face that had seen too many desperate people. "Says you broke into her storage unit and stole family records to blackmail her." Liam stared at the document. It was legal, official. The letterhead was real. "Says you're a drug addict looking for a payout," Miller continued. "Says you've been threatening her for weeks. Said the break-in happened Friday afternoon and you were violent when confronted." "That's not what happened," Liam said. His voice sounded small in the bright room. "I found letters from my mother, a trust agreement. Sarah took money that was supposed to be mine." Miller pulled out another paper, this one a written statement. "She says these letters don't exist. Says this is all in your head. Says you've been off your medication." The words hit Liam like a physical blow. He looked at his hands, at the tremor in them that had never quite gone away, at the history written in his own body of the hospital stays, the psychiatric holds, the medication adjustments. He looked at Miller's face, and he saw it there. The doubt. The assumption that a man who'd been hospitalized before was probably the one who was lying now. "The letter is in my jacket," Liam said. He reached into his pocket, but it was empty. For a moment, he couldn't understand. He searched again, his fingers feeling through the torn lining. Nothing. Then he remembered. The security guard at the gala had ripped his jacket during the struggle, had torn it off him as he was being dragged away. "The guard at the hotel?" Liam said, his voice rising slightly. "He took it. The letter is evidence." Miller stood up and walked to the door. He opened it, paused, and then delivered the final blow. "Security at the hotel says they tossed your trash in the incinerator. No letter, kid. No evidence." "I understand," she said. "But if he's stable for the next 12 hours, I'll come after my meeting. I can't leave now." She hung up. She took another sip of juice. She went back to the spreadsheet, highlighting a row of numbers in green. Those numbers represented millions. She highlighted them carefully, watching the colors spread across the cells like blood through water. Her email notification pinged. She opened it automatically. "Toby needs us. Don't do this. Liam." She looked at it for a moment. Then she moved the cursor to the message and clicked the delete button. The email disappeared. She stood up, straightened her expensive blazer, and picked up her briefcase. Her footsteps clicked across the marble floor, rhythmic and precise. The sound of someone who knew exactly where she was going and exactly what she would do when she got there. The juice sat on the counter, half drunk, and grew cold in the morning light. Toby was pale in the hospital bed, the color of something that had already begun to fade. The machines around him hummed and beeped with mechanical regularity, tracking his remaining life in numbers and graphs. Liam had been sitting by the bed for 6 hours, holding his brother's limp hand, watching the monitors, and waiting for something he didn't want to happen. Toby had always been the soft one. 8 years younger than Liam, 5 years younger than Sarah. Toby had been the one who cried at movies, who volunteered at animal shelters, who believed that people were fundamentally good. An overdose. The hospital had said it wasn't clear yet whether it was accidental or intentional. Liam had sat in the waiting room and known that Toby had always been fragile, that the world had been pressing down on him harder and harder with each passing year, and that at some point, he'd simply stopped pushing back. The door opened. Liam expected a nurse. Instead, it was Sarah. She wasn't looking at Toby. She was pulling a manila folder out of her bag, and as she approached the bed, she placed it directly on top of Toby's medical chart, like she was making a point. Liam stood up. "What is that?" Sarah didn't answer. She opened the folder and pulled out a legal document. The title read, "Waiver of Claims, Family Estate." "He's unconscious," Liam said. His voice was very quiet. "He's legally competent," Sarah said. "I need his signature." Liam reached over and grabbed the folder. He ripped it in half, the paper tearing with a loud, satisfying sound. The document split down the middle, the legal text severing between one line and the next. Sarah's hand came up fast. She slapped him hard across the face, and Liam's head snapped to the side. The impact was sharp, specific, humiliating. For a moment, everything else fell away. And there was only the heat on his cheek and the knowledge that his sister had actually done this thing. That she had actually raised her hand against him in their dying brother's hospital room. He pushed her. His hands went to her shoulders, and he shoved, hard. She stumbled backward, her spine hitting the medical equipment cart, and the cart rolled backward with a heavy clang. Trays of syringes and cotton balls and medical supplies scattered across the floor like an explosion of small, useless things. Sarah came back at him, claws out, and they fell to the floor together. She was scratching at his neck, her nails drawing blood, and he was trying to pin her wrists down. And they were a tangle of limbs and rage between the hospital bed and the wall. The fight was primal and absurd. 2 adults fighting in a hospital room while their brother lay dying above them. One of Toby's monitors went off, the alarm shrieking because Sarah had kicked the machine and a wire had pulled loose. The room filled with a high, piercing sound, and that was what stopped them. The alarm. The absolute clarity that they were destroying this moment, that they were desecrating the space around Toby's still body. A nurse broke through the door, and behind her came security. They pulled Liam and Sarah apart with professional efficiency, moving them with the kind of practiced detachment that came from doing this regularly. Liam found himself pinned against the wall, held by 2 guards who were significantly larger and better trained than he was. Sarah stood a few feet away, her dress torn at the shoulder, her hair disheveled, her breathing still heavy. She pointed at Liam, and then she did something that froze his blood. Her eyes filled with tears. Actual tears, or something that looked exactly like them. And her voice became small and frightened. "He's off his medication," she said to the nurse, speaking with the kind of urgency that made everything she said sound true. "He's been threatening me for weeks. He's unstable. He's a danger to himself and to Toby. Please, please check his medical records." Liam tried to speak, but the guard tightened his grip on his neck, and his words came out strangled and incoherent. He looked at the nurse's face and saw it there immediately. The shift. The moment when she decided that she believed Sarah instead of him. It was a small thing, a barely perceptible change in her expression. But it was everything. It was the moment when his credibility died. Sarah leaned in close to him as they led him away. Her voice was low, a whisper that only he could hear, and the tears had already dried. "I've already signed the papers for your 72-hour observation. By the time you're out, Toby will be gone, and the estate will be closed." The last thing Liam saw was Sarah sitting down in the chair he'd vacated, crossing her legs and looking at her phone. Toby remained on the bed, unconscious, unaware that his siblings had just destroyed each other in the space around him. The psychiatric intake cell was white, pure white. Walls, floor, ceiling, all the same clinical, sterile white that supposedly calmed people. It did the opposite for Liam. It compressed. It suffocated. It made him feel like he was inside someone's skull, trapped in the white noise of another person's mind. He was wearing a paper gown. Nothing else. They'd taken his clothes and his shoes and his dignity, and they'd left him with a thin mattress on the floor and a small vent that blew cold air into the room. A mattress that wasn't a mattress so much as a foam pad, designed so he couldn't hurt himself with anything, so he had nothing but time and his own thoughts to destroy him with. The hours passed. Or maybe it was minutes. Time worked differently in white rooms. An orderly slid a plastic tray through a slot in the door, institutional food that was mostly texture and no flavor, and didn't respond when Liam asked for his phone. Liam watched the phone through the small window in the door, in its clear plastic bag, on the table just out of reach. A notification lit up the screen. A text. A word appeared, glowing against the darkness. "Sarah." Liam begged. He put his face against the glass and begged the orderly who was leaving to give him the phone. His voice cracked. His hands trembled. The orderly ignored him and walked away. Liam could see the text from where he stood. It was small, but the light made it visible. "He's dead. Funeral is private. Don't call." He didn't scream. He didn't rage. He slid down until he was sitting on the floor, his back against the metal door, and he stared at the opposite wall. Nothing moved. Nothing changed. The white pressed in from all sides. His hand found a loose thread on the mattress. He pulled it. The thread came away easily, a thin white string that stretched and stretched. He kept pulling, his eyes fixed on nothing, his mind somewhere else, somewhere that had nothing to do with this room and this moment and the fact that Toby was gone, that his brother had died while he was in a white room, and Sarah had sent him a text about it, like she was notifying him about a package delivery. The thread broke. He found another one. He pulled that one too. The smoke detector had a red light. Liam had noticed it during intake, had filed it away in his memory during the previous hospitalization, years ago, when he'd been here before, and had learned that people who appear unhinged need to understand the systems that confine them. The light was a sensor, and the sensor was connected to the door's magnetic lock. And the lock had a 3-second delay when the alarm was triggered because fire safety codes said so. 3 seconds. That was all the time in the world, if you understood how to use it. The orderly passed his window at 6 a.m., beginning the morning shift. Liam watched him walk down the hallway. Then he waited. He pulled a piece of his paper gown loose, rolled it into a tight wick, and felt in his shoe for the lighter he'd hidden there during intake. A silver Zippo he'd palmed when they were taking his belongings. Nothing fancy. Just a tool. He held the flame close to the wick. It caught, glowing orange for a moment before the paper blackened. He raised the tiny flame toward the smoke detector and held it there. The alarm erupted. High-pitched and piercing, it filled the hallway with an urgency that triggered decades of institutional reflex. The magnetic lock clicked. Liam pushed the door open and sprinted down the hallway. his bare feet slapping against the linoleum, his heart a wild animal inside his chest. He grabbed the plastic bag with his belongings at the intake desk, clothes, wallet, phone, and burst through the fire exit into the gray morning. Rain was falling, and the rain was cold, and the air outside smelled like freedom mixed with the metallic edge of the fire alarm that was still shrieking behind him. He hid behind a dumpster in the parking lot, his hands shaking as he tore open the plastic bag. His phone was there, still intact, still holding a charge. He navigated to a hidden folder in his cloud storage, one he'd set up months ago, one that Sarah didn't know existed. There it was. Mother, confession husk backup.tdf. A PDF of his mother's letter, scanned and saved the day after he'd found it in the storage locker, uploaded to a server Sarah would never think to access. He'd done this automatically, habitually, the way people in pain sometimes create backup plans for their pain. And now the backup was everything. The rain fell on his face, his hands steady now. He had evidence, he had proof, and he had absolutely nothing left to lose. The boardroom was a temple to wealth and power. Glass table, leather chairs, the city sprawling below in windows that took up an entire wall. Sarah was at the head of the table, her pen suspended over the final merger document, her face arranged in an expression of triumph. 3 senior partners sat across from her, nodding, opening their checkbooks, ready to sign away $80 million to her vision. The door opened. A young man in clean clothes, stolen from a gym locker, still damp at the edges, walked in carrying a tablet. Liam's face was pale, but his eyes were cold. Absolutely cold. He looked at Sarah, and he watched recognition dawn on her face, watched the color drain from her cheeks as she realized that he was here, that he was alive, that he had somehow escaped. He slid the tablet across the glass table to the managing partner. On the screen was a video. It showed the ICU room, the hospital bed, the machines beeping in the background. It showed Sarah's face, clear and unmistakable, speaking in a voice full of contempt and victory. I withdrew the funds. You'll never see a dime. By the time you're out of here, the estate will be closed, and there's nothing you can do about it. The audio was pristine. Liam had recorded it during their fight, his phone capturing every word, every cruel inflection. Sarah's face on screen was twisted with rage and satisfaction. It was damning. It was complete. It was absolutely, irrefutably true. The managing partner looked at the video. He looked at Sarah. His expression shifted from interest to comprehension to disgust. "This is fraud," he said quietly. He took off his glasses. "This is elder abuse. Get out of this office before we call the police." The other partners were already pushing back from the table, the merger contract forgotten. One of them was actually pulling out his phone, his face grim. Sarah was standing now, and her hands were shaking so badly that she couldn't speak. Liam took his tablet back, looked at his sister for a moment, at her pale face, her trembling hands, her complete and absolute destruction. And then he turned and walked out of the boardroom. His footsteps echoed across the lobby floor. The city skyline behind him was gray and indifferent, exactly as it had been before, exactly as it would be tomorrow. The cemetery was cold, and the grass was stiff with frost. The wooden cross marking Toby's grave stood among dozens of others, all of them the same, all of them marking the end of someone's particular pain. Liam placed a single white lily on the fresh earth. The flower looked absurdly alive against the cold ground, its petals luminous in the early morning light. He noticed the envelope tucked into the base of the cross immediately. Expensive paper. Sarah's monogram embossed in the corner. He picked it up and opened it. Inside, "I have nothing left. Please help me. I'm so sorry. S. He stood there, holding the note, and thought about the eviction, the hallway, the hospital floor, the white room. He thought about Toby's hand in his, still warm but getting colder. He thought about the funeral that Sarah had made private, that he wasn't invited to, that he'd learned about through a text message in a psychiatric intake cell. He didn't rip the note. He didn't shout at the grave. He folded the note and placed it back on the dirt where the lily was, and watched as the wind picked it up and mixed it with the mud. The signature S became illegible, then invisible, absorbed into the earth. He walked toward the cemetery gate. His footsteps crunched on the gravel. In his pocket was a photograph, the only thing he'd kept from all the boxes they'd thrown into the hallway. It showed him and Toby as babies, both of them laughing in a bathtub, sunlight reflecting off the water. The gate creaked as he pushed it open. Behind him, the cemetery was silent except for the wind moving through the grass. Ahead, the city was waiting, indifferent to the small tragedies and large cruelties that made up the lives of people who lived in its shadow. He walked forward, the photograph held loosely in his hand, and didn't look back.